Hello and welcome to Get Moving TV. I'm your guest host, Rich Sigrist. Thanks for joining us. Here in Ventura, we have the best of everything. Great weather, food, music, art. It's why I live here. And we're part of a global community, one that seems to be getting smaller every day. And we watch the news, and it's hard to not see acts of violence in our workplace, in our schools, places of entertainment, and places we hold sacred, like our churches, our homes. And if you look at the results of these acts of violence, popular opinion might have you think that these results are unavoidable, maybe not preventable. Well, my guest might be saying that that might be wrong. With me today is Shihan Larry Reynosa, owner and chief instructor of Makoto Dojo, School of Aikido here in Ventura. Welcome, Shihan.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, Rich. I do have to correct one thing that you did say, though, because I'm not really the owner anymore of Makoto Dojo, but I am the CEO and chief instructor there. Since we transformed the dojo from a private business into a 501c3 charitable nonprofit, which is something that is changing in the martial arts studios. But my goal was to be seen as something apart from your typical martial arts studio. I really want to reach out to our community and have them see the value of what we provide. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to be here today, and I thank you for giving me that opportunity.
An important distinction. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, for instance, Aikido, a lot of us have heard about things like, well, of course, karate and judo and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. How long have you been training in Aikido? And for some of us uninitiated, tell us a little bit about what Aikido is.
Well, you were a student of mine, and probably still see yourself as that. But I got started in training in Aikido right after I graduated from Chico State in 1973, a long time ago, which makes that about 41 years, and which is a long time for some, not enough time for others. But when it comes to Aikido, you have to understand that Aikido is first and foremost a non-competitive martial art. The vision of the founder of Aikido saw a greater purpose in the martial arts as a method of creating kindness and compassion in a person, rather than that to embrace the fighting spirit, but in the right way, in a way to defend themselves. So as such, Aikido is something that is being practiced by 1.5 million people around the world of all ages. I happened to start my training for kids at 4 years old, and at every level we have to, provide appropriate training and without turning them into meaner individuals. And also I want people to understand that Makoto Dojo is not a place that supports anything that exacerbates violence, such as these highly competitive ultimate fighting championships and things that are multi-billion-dollar industries today.
Now, when you say non-competitive, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, not to take the competitive spirit away from an individual, because I also embrace baseball and football and things like that create character, team building, and team sports. But I want to provide a way of that a student can see that they need to actually perfect themselves, work hard to make themselves a better person, and create that kind of competitiveness within themselves, rather than feeling that they need to beat up somebody else to win a trophy or to gain a belt or to prove their superiority. To me, that's one of the problems in our society, that we are so preoccupied with the whole idea of winning that losing becomes traumatic for a child. And I want my kids and my students to embrace failure as a means of learning from their mistakes and taking their mistakes in a positive manner. And just as a parent would, spank a child for making a mistake or going out on the street, they'll learn from that. So that's what I call wrathful compassion, in a sense. So we're embracing the whole concept of kindness, compassion, even to that level.
So you say you have students as starting as early as 4 years old. Will they train with older folks also, or do you have, like as you say, just like kids classes and junior classes and older folks as well?
Well, that's the beauty of Makoto Dojo, because we're large enough and have been successful enough in our community that we can now offer different levels, because the bad part about it is that a 4-year-old is going to be training with an adult. You don't want that. You want 4-year-olds to be training with anywhere between 4 and 6, and then have another group from about 7 to 9, and because there's the growth rates of 7 and 9-year-olds can be tremendous. And then you jump to 10 and 12, and you've got 6-foot 12-year-olds, you know, so they could actually join an adult class because of their size, but their mentality is still that of a child. So we still provide a youth level of classes, and then of course they jump into the adult training. And some of our teens, 16, 17 years old, I invite into our adult training. But you have to consider the mental makeup of a child versus just the physical nature of their size and abilities, because again, I've seen 5-year-olds who are just outstanding athletes, and yet their mentality is still that of a 5-year-old. So you have to be careful in that way, and that's why I love Aikido-based technique, because it's not just competitive driven. So I'm not having a younger kid competing with an older child.
And without the sense of competition, how does one know they're getting better?
Well, we have a testing program where we actually invite a child to test their skills. And of course, one might think, well, then you're going to compete. Well, no, it's not about that, because what we do is we train the testing partners to provide the potential attacks, such as a grab or a push or a kick, and then the testing person is student would be then able to, you know, employ their techniques and see if they work, and then in a positive manner. It's not about do they defeat them, but I always tell my children, you know, what do you learn from testing? And what I want them to understand is what they're learning is what they don't know, not languishing in what they think they know. So they don't go out there with a puffed out chest, a cocky attitude, and that type of thing. I want them to go out there with a humble attitude, saying, doggone it, I should have done that better. Doggone it, now I got to work on that, you know, and for the next level. So it's not so competitive that I fail them or that they lose anything. But in fact, a little bit older, the younger kids, I don't fail, because they need those M&Ms, they need those colored belts, you know, they do, and I acknowledge that. But in the older kids, in the teens and the 10 and 12-year-olds, I want to employ failure. I'm going to fail some of them and have them understand that failure is not bad. Failure is just part of what happens, and when you fail, you get back up. Sure. And you get back on that horse again and you ride. Or you choose not to ride horses anymore.
Okay. Okay. And is Aikido as a martial art always practiced with open hands or just hand to hand?
Well, most of the classical training is just open hand training. But you know, you got to understand today, there are more guns in this society than there are adult human beings. Mm-hmm. And that's not going to go away. Just because a Columbine or Newtown mass killing happens, Smith & Wesson doesn't go out of business. Quite to the contrary, more people go get guns. So what we're seeing in our society is a rise in criminal acts involving guns, knives, bricks, blunt weapons. So I have to expand those trainings to include disarming of those weapons, and which I have worked with law enforcement and other agencies to perfect.
Okay, and we're going to talk about more of that in our next segment. Okay, much more to come, Ventura, on Get Moving TV. Welcome back to Get Moving TV, and we're continuing our discussion with Shihan Larry Reynosa. Now, Shihan, I've always known you as Sensei, but recently you were given the honor of Shihan. Can you elaborate on that for us, please?
Well, that's as difficult as it is for you to say, it's as difficult for me to hear. I've been blessed with great teachers, and today I've been enjoying a great relationship with the world headquarters in Japan, Aikido headquarters, headed up by Doshu Moriteru Ueshiba. And about 7 years ago, he promoted me to a 6th-degree black belt, and about 2 years ago, he granted me the title of Shihan. For all practical purposes here in the States, one might refer to Shihan as a master instructor, or if you look at our educational system, maybe a doctorate degree, I suppose. There's no one-to-one relationship, but that's basically, for the layperson, that's what it means. So I'm honored and appreciative of it. Doesn't change me, really.
Well deserved, and an honor as well. So congratulations on that.
I appreciate that.
Okay, good. Okay. So why is Aikido a viable means of self-defense, and why perhaps is Aikido training important to our community of Ventura?
Well, to answer the question, first off, in regards to why is it a viable means of self-defense, sometimes the traditionalists don't like to hear that. They like to maintain tradition in Japan is very important. And I've been told by some of the old folks there, don't change anything, you know. But I can't do that, because I see what's happening in our society. And when you see how our children are raised, how men and women's sports are conducted in this country, there's always a women's division, there's always a men's division, there's always a boys division, there's always a girls division. And why is that? And basically it's because when you pit power against power, the bigger power is going to win, always. And so men are always going to be superior strength to women. So you're going to have a women's division, because the men are always going to win a weightlifting contest, basketball contest, all that. So you're going to continue to see that in sports. But in violence on the street, there's no women's and men's division. A woman has to usually defend themselves against a man. And a bully against a younger child is always going to be bigger. Typically, you know, the smaller kid is not going to be picking on the bigger kid. You know, in some cases that's true. But so you have to look at that, how that's set up. So in my thinking, Aikido-based technique, being non-competitive, being more about self-defense, being more about utilizing the force of an attacker to your advantage. In other words, blending with their force, blending with their grab. And I go through demonstrations all the time where I can show people that, where, you know, a force is coming at me and then I'm going to go with that force versus pitting my power against it. Because once again, if a woman resists or gets grabbed in that first moment, they're usually beaten. And so we have strategies for that, and to adhere to that ways of utilizing that force versus going up against that force, because ultimately they're going to lose.
And when we think of sports, whether it be team or whatever in our schools, and those sports have rules.
Absolutely.
And what are the rules of the street?
There are no rules of the street. The rules of the street is you do your best you can. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're seeing today, and that's why Aikido-based technique works for women, works for kids, because the kids are going to have to go up against that adult psychopath, pedophile, gang member that comes with 4 or 5 guys. And we teach that kind of methodology. We teach that there are no rules, and if you can't, I mean, in our society, admit it, I mean, we have tons of laws and tons of penalties for those crimes committed, but that has not stemmed spousal homicide or child molestation to one bit. So criminals are still going to exist. What we need is better ways of dealing with that crime without turning our kids into the same criminal, you know.
And you have 3 principles: avoid, control, and choose. Can you talk about that?
And I still have law enforcement students today that are still using those principles, because when you think about it, a nurse in a hospital, a cop on the street, a teacher in a schoolroom has to avoid being injured in that first moment of the attack. That's my first basic: avoid. Don't be grabbed, don't be punched, don't be kicked, which extends to don't be shot, stabbed, or hit with a brick. And you need to do that first. Unfortunately, so many martial arts training programs are so preoccupied with the Jackie Chan wowie zowie stuff that they forget that. one has to be probably more skilled not to be hit, not to be stabbed, than to learn how to stab somebody or how to break a board with their head, you know, something ridiculous like that. The second part is to control yourself, control your mental attitude, see things calmly, be able to perceive things as they are, and then be able to act upon that. And that action needs to be a choice. And you need to be able to choose correctly. You choose incorrectly, it can lead to a bad outcome. You choose correctly, the result could be totally different. It's a matter of do or die, you know, do it right or don't. It's kind of like the old Yodaism, you know, there is no try, do it or don't. Because if you don't, you're dead.
We've shared some stories before our talk today, but one thing I didn't share with you is when I left the house, I noticed that our garage door was open just a touch. And when I came back, I talked to my wife, and I said, you know, we left the garage door open last night, and we left ourselves, you know, open to possible intruder. And the first thing she said to me was, oh, that's okay, we live in a safe neighborhood.
All right. Once again, denial. And of course, denial is that powerful enemy of successful predictions. We need to be better trained and take on these training methodologies that are going to increase our awareness to the possibilities of these dangers, and then take on the possibility in a way that is not going to traumatize us and you know, lead us in the wrong direction. Because when you think about some of our school systems that have, for instance, zero tolerance for fighting on their campuses. I agree with it, you know, fighting's not right. But when a bully bullies a victim and hurts them or goes to hurt them, and then that would-be victim uses his civil right to defend themselves and actually responds, and then the teacher sees the fight, then they all get suspended. And so what kind of message does that send to the victim of the bully that gets suspended because he defended himself appropriately, or maybe not because he's not trained? And then to understand that that same victim of bullying could say, you know, I've had it. I'm done with this. They're not going to bully me anymore. And how many times have we seen that manifest itself in our society where that same victim of bullying turns into the mass shooter? I think it was alluded to in the Columbine case that Klebold had been previously bullied himself, Newtown, Connecticut. So we've seen this manifest itself in our society. So I think we really have to be careful when it comes to this kind of training. You mentioned run, hide, and fight. I'm sorry I didn't answer that earlier. But the thing is that you see these on the video. You can look them up online. The FBI site, the Homeland Security site, and they teach you run, hide, and fight, but they leave it up to your own imagination to fight. And I think that's where I come in. That's where I can provide practical training.
And let's continue that discussion when we come back, okay?
Great.
More Ventura when we come back. This is Get Moving TV. And we're back with Get Moving TV, speaking again with Shihan Reynosa. Now, you mentioned, Shihan, run, hide, and fight. You offer some training with that, don't you?
Yeah, when it comes to those kind of training films, as I mentioned, you can find these online. And most law enforcement agencies are going to take you through the run, hide, recommend, you know, running if you can, if you know where the shooter is, hide if you can, if you can't get away, lock down the room, that type of thing. I get to all that. And then what they do is they stop short of the fight. They don't want to show you how to fight because of liability reasons, I'm sure. But that's where I come in. That's where self-defense assault prevention training at the college level that I provide at Ventura College, or other private training sessions are held. But the fact of the matter is that there's better strategies that are out there. It just can't be left to your own imagination. I don't think the layperson is trained enough in responding. I mean, we're being told to throw cans of food at the shooter, take a fire extinguisher and throw at the shooter. That's going to get you killed because it's going to draw attention to you. They're recommending to rush a guy through a 3-foot doorway. That's not going to work. So there's better ways, and I've created a film in response to that type of thing that I use in my college classes. I've kept it private, but I'm willing to share that with anybody that wants to pursue that line of training, so please call me.
Now I've seen the film, and we thought that it might be a little bit too controversial for this show. Now, do you have that available? Is it available to our viewers?
Well, it's not to the general public. However, like I said, call me if you want to pursue this line of training. I'm more than willing to share you my perspective on this, but I've kept it private in that same regard. I created it with my classroom environment at the college, and I use it as a tool in my teaching there.
Okay. Now, should Aikido as a means of self-defense be part, in your opinion, of our education system?
Unfortunately, if the challenge for me is to educate administrators, corporate managers, principals of schools that the value of Aikido is there. It's what we need in our society. We don't need other things that promote violence. We don't need other methods of violence, such as cage fighting, things like that I mentioned before. What we need is a logical, peaceful means of teaching self-defense methodologies. I think this is so appropriate to have in our regular educational curriculum. So I would prefer to call it self-defense assault prevention training, because that's what we need, and that's what parents think of when they think of their children, their daughters and their sons. So to call it Aikido training, they're not going to buy that, because Aikido is a martial art. So, but if we can extract those practical means of training and call it self-defense assault prevention, now we're going to get somewhere. But it should definitely be a part of the curriculum in our everyday education. And I've talked with people like Hannibal Jackson and Doss Williams, the assemblyman that actually visited Ventura College and presented a panel discussion on SB 967, the Yes Means Yes law that Governor Jerry Brown signed into law in November 2014. This is an important law because it demands that there needs to be consent on both sides of a relationship. And it made it stiffer penalties for rape and that type of thing. But the failing of our society is that there's funding for crisis management, aftercare, medical care for rape victims. But the sad part about it is that there's no funding for prevention programs. And I asked that question to Hannibal Jackson herself, which was very positive in her response, but there's nothing been done. And what I'd like to see, I mean, I'm all for those programs, safe houses, aftercare, because I feel bad for those people. But whatever happened to the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? Where are the prevention programs? That's what I'm providing. That's what I want to provide. And I need grants to do that. I had a great program at Anacapa Middle School here in Ventura for 37 girls, and it worked very well. But we lost that grant. Now we need it back. So I'm looking for grants, I'm looking for support for this kind of thing in our educational system.
Now, I know with schools it often is about the grants, and the first time that sometimes a school sees a grant, the first thing they're thinking about is, oh, I could buy another iPad with that or a piece of software. Where can we be seen or shown the true value of something like self-defense as opposed to that
when I mentioned that, and I think we've talked about this, is in Moore, Oklahoma a couple of years when that F5 tornado came roaring through the town and wiped out half the town, and that was where school kids were swept up and killed too. One of the administrators were actually questioned, why didn't they build shelters underground with the grant money that they got? Why, and they said, well, we have so many kids coming into our education system, we thought it would be better used to build more classrooms. But those were the same classrooms that got swept away. So once again, denial that we need protective measures, protective training, that's where it fails. And that's what I'm appealing to our community, is to understand we need defensive, preventative measures, preventative programs. We need my program and programs like mine in our schools at every level. And nothing's going to change until that happens, because school shootings, violence is still going to perpetuate our society, because once again, we see it in our video games, we see it in our films, we see, sad to say, but violence sells. And on the other hand, when it strikes home, we react very, despondently about it, and we're sad about it, but I'm not surprised. And once again, I think denial plays a big part in that. So we have to, what I see my job, one of my goals in being here and being with you, is to move people out of denial, get them out of denial, and get them to understand the possibilities. The things that are going on in our society, mass shootings every day, are not going to go away. And so we need better means of dealing with this level of violence, both in schools and out of schools.
And real briefly, you've talked to local law enforcement as well?
Yeah, Ken Corney, Chief of Police, Ventura PD, is a good friend of mine. My son is now Ventura Police Department, and he's been able to use his skills in that training. Matter of fact, the Ventura PD has a basis of Aikido training as their defensive tactics foundation. And so we have gotten to a certain level, and I acknowledge them for doing that, but this is what we need throughout our society.
Okay, all right. Okay. Well, it sounds like you've taken Aikido to a whole new level, and you've somewhat bridged the gap between Aikido and our community. Where can folks find Makoto Dojo and perhaps even see you in action?
Well, first, I'm glad you said that, because that's one of my goals, is to build the bridge between the theory of the dojo and the reality that we have to live in. If there's no connection, then there's no point in doing what we do. So I thank you for having me, and you can find me at 3026 Telegraph Road here in Ventura. It's near 5 Points. Come by anytime. You're able to see me in action, teaching 6 days a week. And we have you can pick up a brochure at the front door and catch us on the internet.
Well, thank you, Shihan Reynosa, and thank you, Ventura, and thank you for joining us on Get Moving TV.